Let's do this. Hi, Cedric. Welcome to the Next Generation. It's awesome to have you today.
Oh, Nike, thank you very much for the invite. Excited for the interview. Hopefully everything is going well on your side.
Yeah,
I got my
things are
coffee ready.
good.
Coffee ready. We're about to have a great conversation. I know it.
Yeah. Tell us more about who you are and your journey in life and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So look, that's it's a broad question. And so, this is what I would say. Originally, from in the States, from Georgia, Columbus, Georgia. And I always like to reference that it's not Atlanta at all. And so, everyone who has this picture of what Atlanta ATL looks like, that is not it. And so it's a smaller, way smaller rural town that I'm from, single parent household, middle child of three. We grew up, I would say, fairly, we were, in poverty, right? Low income, making it, check to check. But I would say this though, we grew up in a space to where everyone around us was like that. And so it was something, to be honest, that I did not realize until I was probably in high school. And I think, when you get into high school, folks start, new clothes, new shoes, all this stuff starts to happen. And then you realize like, yeah, I ain't got that. It's something different. And so, understanding kind of that journey and that path for me, went through, a lot of things kind of shifted. And I like to think about my life in this way, is that there are probably, I would say 3 to 5 pivot points or like kind of change of directions that have happened in my life to where I can like pinpoint the decision that was made or the thing that happened, that prevented me from going down the path, right, to versus getting me to where I am today. And so I think about those things versus like playing sports, really not thinking about college in high school, switching over to football and then getting interest. And that really, to be honest, as much as, school was important and things of that nature, you were still kind of taught like be a fireman, be a police officer, do those type of things. Not until I actually got that interest from college football schools and different programs and things like that I really think about college being a real opportunity for me. And so a lot of things kind of transpired to that point to where, I ended up going to, one of the best HBCUs, historically black colleges in the land, Savannah State University. And, went there, got my undergrad bachelor's degree. As I navigated through that process and through that career, I started to have these kind of, I would say, real talk conversations with myself around what is it that you want to do. And I'll be honest, I didn't have an answer. I did not know for any reason. I'm like, I'm getting a degree. I love entrepreneurship. Me and my best friend started our first business in high school, cutting grass, E&C lawn services, shout out. We started it in the effort to get money for football, ended up making it into a business. And I'm gonna stop right there because we probably didn't pay taxes like we should have. At that time, right? We had a lawnmower. I had an 82 Cadillac Fleetwood. Couldn't even fit the lawnmower in the truck. just slid it in there as much as I could so that we can go cut grass, 50 for the front, 25 for the front, 25 for the back, 10 if you wanted us to edge it up. We was making money. And so, we ended up doing that. I get into college, right? And so I always thought I wanted to do some entrepreneurship, but I actually kind of went down this path of doing like operations, supply chain, and going down that path. One of those things when I talk about like those switches, those pivots in my life that happened, I ended up with going to a conference one year. And, we went to this conference, we drove down to it, excited to go. We get to this conference and it was for my fraternity. We get to this conference and then we found out that we didn't register for the conference. And so we found out our keeper finance never paid the money registration. So we sitting at the conference, with no way to get in. And so we get there dressed up in our suits, ready to go in day one and find that out. And so we end up having to go and actually get the money from like a Western Union so that we can go and pay for the actual conference to get in. As we're walking downstairs, I remember like it was yesterday. As we're walking down the stairs, we get to my car. I look and my back tire is flat. Now I'm in college, don't have much money. My back tire is flat. I'm trying to figure out, man, like what's going on and what's happening. And so, we end up going through this process of, put the dummy tire on, We went to go get a new tire for the car that cost me like $80, $90 of money I didn't have. We went through, that took probably a couple of hours to do. We went and got the money. That took another couple of hours. And so by the time we got back to the conference, that day was over with. We started ready to go. That day was over with. During that conference, they had a presentation about internship for a large multinational organization that we missed. And so I was at the point at that time where I was tired, I was drained. I still had my suit on, but I was walking back to my room just like, I just want to go lay down for a little bit. And then I ended up walking past an individual who said, "Hey, did you catch our presentation inside of the conference?" And I was like, "Nah, man, I'm just going to go to the room." And he said, "Come in for a second. Tell me about yourself." And so we just started talking a little bit. And then the next thing you know, he said, "You got a resume?" And the one thing my teacher taught me in business school was that always keep a resume on you. Like wherever you go in those conferences, keep one on you. So I ended up giving him the resume. And then on the spot, he said, "Come on, step in here real quick. Let's have a conversation." So we stepped in, we started to talk a little bit. 15 minutes later, he said, "I want to offer you, opportunity to come to this symposium in Ohio. And we want you to come in. It's going to be a leadership symposium. You're going to be able to meet a lot of individuals, learn a lot of things, X, Y, and Z." And so, it was something once at that moment, I was like, what just happened, right? I just went from, not being able to attend the conference to ultimately, just getting accepted into on the spot into a symposium in Ohio. I've never been on a plane. The furthest I've ever been from home is 4 hours. I'm like, and I said yes to it. So I immediately said yes. I was just like, not until I said yes, I was like, that means I gotta fly.
I'll figure it out. Say yes, then figure it out.
And so we go through that process, right? I end up going to this this leadership symposium, and I would tell you this: that was one of the second moment that changed my life. Up until that point, I had really never seen a business professional in corporate America. Even with the career fairs at school, it was a lot of banks, local organizations that come, a lot of the military and things of that nature, to where I never seen, someone that looks like me in, a large organization really, making things happen and doing it. And at that symposium, I was exposed to that. And I'll tell you this, at that time, my mind at that point had been expanded, because I almost felt a little bit like everything I had been told up until this point was probably a lie. That's kind of how my mind was thinking, because I'm like, I don't got to be a fireman. I don't got to be a police officer. This route that I'm going down with that's going to pay me $30,000 a year to do logistics, that's not the route that I'm doing, because y'all are telling me y'all going to pay me $45,000 just to be an intern. And so I'm like thinking through some of this stuff, right? And so as we go through that process, when I ended up getting an internship, getting an internship, coming back, went great, coming back to school that fall, graduating, and then kind of navigating through that process, right? Just to kind of fast forward there, I ended up getting my master's at the Ohio State Universities in a university, and master's in human resource management. I spent, I would say probably 4 to 5 years after that in HR, graduating from a leadership development program, traveling, around the world. I think I've moved probably 6 times.
Wow.
In the span of those years, different roles, different opportunities, going to different, symposiums and things of that nature. And so, I would say probably, right around the time I was in my 4th or 5th role, I got to the point to where, I was, growing in HR. I was having, a great career thus far, moving fairly quickly, and things were going well. And things started to happen that I did not agree with morally. And it started to get to a place to where I knew that there weren't many people that looked like me inside of the business. And I just said, hey, what can I do to get more people in? And I'm in HR, I'm in the hiring conversation, those discussions. I'm thinking, yes, I have that power, that ability to be able to make some change happen. And ironically enough, it would be situations and times where I would bring in people that were, head and heels above anyone that they were bringing into their programs. And they would still not even get considered for roles and opportunities. And every time I turn around, I would ask why. It always appeared that there was another excuse as to why they couldn't get hired. One excuse that kind of baffled me, and it kind of did it for me, was that they it was for a leadership program. They wanted them to go into finance leadership program. And they said, I asked them about, I gave them some candidates. I said, hey, they went through, they got, internships, PwC, Ernst & Young. They have their undergrad, they have their master's in accounting. This is a great candidate, right? And they said, well, this person seems like this will be a step down for them. And I say, no, it won't be a step down, because the amount of experience that they have actually lines up with who you hire for the program. But because they saw that it was a master's of accounting degree, they tried to put it as, well, this could be a step down for them. When in actuality, it wasn't, because you have two routes in accounting. You can do 155 hours in undergrad to get your CPA, or you can do the 120 in undergrad and then do the other 25, 30 in your master's program to get the same CPA qualifications, right? To be able to go take the exam. And so when I started to see these what's the word here? Excuses or reasonings as to why they weren't going to hire. And that was just one example. I started to dig into what's going on and what's happening. And as I started to dig into that a little bit deeper, you start to see that it was happening across the business in a lot of other places, to where people were qualified, people they could do the job and were probably already doing the job better than some of their counterparts, but then weren't getting opportunities. And then you go into situations to where they're doing recruitment at schools to where you have 1-2% Black, African-American, Hispanic populations at these universities. And you're going out there and you're bringing back a drove of just full of white candidates for these roles, and not going to these places to where you actually we know that there's great talent. We know that the talent pipelines exist, which is a lie when companies say that it doesn't. But I started to see these trends start to happen, to where I just started to figure out, like, those conversations I started having myself, like, is this the place for me? And really what it boiled down to was, if I continue on the path that I'm currently on, would I have made the impact that I wanted to make? And that was a question I started to ask myself. And I started to get to that reason or the answer, and saying, I can't make the impact I want to make inside of this organization. And so I started to figure out what was next, right? Going through that process, and I spent years working, in corporate. Corporate is nice. They pay you good money. You get a leadership program, all these different stuff is great. You move around, don't have to pay for none of that stuff. And so I started to go through this process of, like, what's next for me? And I remember the day as it was clean, January 6th at 12:35 in 2016. I got this idea. And this is so specific because I shot up out the bed so fast to write it down that I had to go do it. I got this idea around, how can I use my skills around HR, recruitment, diversity and inclusion to use it in a business, perspective, to where I can go help other companies do this. And that was essentially the birth of Jump Recruits. Wow. And so, started Jump Recruits in 2016. We essentially today full service recruitment firm, focusing on, one, how do we help candidates get access to more opportunities within corporate America? But then two, how do we help corporate companies build structures, strategies, as well as the culture and the processes needed to not only attract and hire diverse talent, but then also retain and advance and help them grow within their organizations. And so I'm gonna stop there because I went a lot, but I'm gonna stop there. And there's a lot more to it, but I definitely want to make sure that we kind of go have some dialogue here. But that's just a little bit.
No, that's incredible. I think, like, just unpacking your journey, having an understanding of your evolution has really brought to light why you are passionate about transformation, why you're passionate about diversity and inclusion, and empowering undeserved communities. I want us to take a step back. Quite often when we have this conversation about D&I, it's really from a place of empowering marginalized communities and from a place of, like, equity, essentially. But I want to twist the conversation a little bit. What do companies, corporates, what do they stand to gain when they have more diverse teams?
Yeah. It's a lot, right? First of all, I'm gonna tell you this: the world is not gonna be, can't be as successful as it could be without Black people, Hispanic people as such, right? We just bring that sauce and that culture. But I would say that I would say that when you're bringing in different perspectives and different backgrounds to the organization, right? The one thing that an organization is looking to do is, one, make money. Two, they need to make sure that they're, sustainable for the future, in that organization, so they can be able to last for, a long time. And when you think about that, what is the organization made of? Organization is made of people, right? That's not only is your biggest expense on your balance sheet, but it's also your biggest asset within the organization is your people.
Mm-hmm.
And when you bring in people from different backgrounds, from different cultures, right? You're not only able to get the ideas, understand kind of, the differences and how people think, but you're building products and you're building services for the world and what the world looks like. And the world is just not white. The world is just not black, right? The world is different shades, different colors, different ethnicities, religions, different genders. Like, the world is different. And so when you're building your products, you have to take into account all those various different facets of who are the people that make up, whether it's the nation, the country, the state, the world that we live in, and being able to make sure that if we're going to build products for those people, if we're going to build products for those countries or whoever that may be, do we have the representation in our organization that will allow us to get the firsthand, input from those backgrounds to say, what should we do? How should we be looking at this? Is there anything that we're missing? Like, what should be our approach to these conversations, right? Having people at the table in those discussions will allow you to really get the full breadth of how can we be as innovative as possible, but then also make sure, how can we make sure that every customer, every person that we touch, our product connects in a personable way, because we have people on the other side that's from those various different cultures and background that's helping us make those connections for us. And so that's the benefit, when it comes to diversity in organizations, right? It's something like, as we look at, statistics in the US, last year, we've had over 50% of children under the age of 16 are now people of color. And so now you've seen the change in a mass way shift in the US, to where in 15, 20 years, predominant race or culture in the US will not just be white or Caucasian, I would say, in this particular situation. It's going to be more diverse. It's going to be that melting pot, right, that we live in. And so how do organizations, understanding that information, make sure that they're building products now, that they're doing what they need to do now in order to have, not only to be, here when that time comes, right, in 15, 20 years, but also to make sure that we're providing for the people that make up, our nation. And so there's a lot of, business benefit. There's a lot of cultural benefits. There's a lot of, when it comes to economical benefits, right? When you think about being able to, have people come into the organization and make those salaries and make those incomes that can change their lives. So it's a lot, right, that comes from the benefit of not only what organization gain from hiring diverse individuals, but then also, what diverse individuals gain from going to organizations, right?
No, this is powerful, really, really powerful. And so if there's such a compelling case for it, like you've, highlighted from an economics perspective, cultural, I guess beyond what are the challenges that corporates are facing in improving the diversity and inclusion of their workforces?
Yeah. So why another, it's a great question. It's a broad one though. This is what I would say. As there are many things that we can do, right? Every culture, every company, their culture and that company is different, right? So there's kind of nuances to what should happen, right, within certain organizations. But I would say as a whole, and from my perspective, how I've seen it, the organizations that I work with, the things that I've looked at, read, research that I've done, the biggest piece that I see preventing corporate organization or just any organization from really progressing in this space is that we're solving for the symptom, but we're not actually solving for the problem. And that is something to where we are, if I say that, my leg hurts and you want to, go in and solve for that pain, the question is, why does your leg hurt? What happened? How did we get to this place your leg hurt? That's what we're not solving for in corporate. So we want to get to this place to where we say, hey, let's talk about unconscious bias. Let's talk about how do we go in and recognize bias? What do we do? How do we interact in these situations? The real question in that particular situation is just an example is help an individual understand, why do you have the bias? How did it come about? What are the interactions from birth, growing up? Like, how was this instilled to you up until this point? So that we can understand and pinpoint what the problem is. Because if we're just focusing on ultimately unconscious bias, which is a symptom of how you were raised, the people that you're around, the interactions that you have, the conversations that you have, unconscious bias is a symptom of all of that. And so if we only focus on the symptom, we can't really go in and solve the problem. And so I would say that the failure to identify what the problem is hurting organizations from moving forward. The other piece of that is, in America, there's more effort put into not wanting to face reality.
Denial.
And the denial, getting like trying to X out certain things that happened in our history, like trying to say what's already happened. It's already happened. It's already been done. And you're trying to say that wasn't the case. We don't want to understand the impact of race and how much not only has that impacted up until this point, but how it impacts now, right? We don't want to face this aspect of what is systemic racism. It's not a question of, are you a racist? The question is, the systems, the institutions were built on a philosophy. They were built on racist practice, racist laws, racist policies that are still operating those systems and those institutions today. And so recognizing the problem is probably the biggest piece. And when you don't want to recognize the problem, what you end up doing is you end up going to the symptoms. Well, I want to have, events in the organization, business resource groups. We want to have fun, food, fun, and fellowship. But the question is not, have you solved the problem? Have we actually changed behaviors? Have we helped folks understand from a self-awareness perspective? Have we helped folks understand, deeper around, who they are? How do they contribute to this? What are those things in their background that's helped them get to this place, right? That we're at today. We don't do that as a whole. And then there's so much that is happening externally, right? Critical race theory is not a big thing, right? in America, right? We just recently had Juneteenth become a federal holiday, right? But you still have states that don't want to teach it in school. You still have states that don't want to recognize that slavery happened. You still have a lot of these things to where we know what the truth is. Not only is it in book, it's been documented. We have, in some cases, footage, i.e. Black Wall Street massacre, right? Tulsa massacre. It is footage. And you have people who still don't want to believe that it happened. You have survivors from that still alive today. Mother Fletcher was 101 years old. And people still don't want to believe that it happened. And so like, that's that piece around America not wanting to face this reality. America not want to come to this point to where we look at, the only way for us to move forward is to address what has happened and to once again address the problem so that we can move forward together in this country, in this system that we're in. And the failure to do that, right, is ultimately going to hold us back. And that's anything, right? It's like, you go to a therapy session, you got to be honest. You got to tell the truth, right? We have to address the problem. We can't heal. We can't actually move forward. And the failure to do that has hurt us in a lot of ways and continue to hurt us.
Wow. Wow. I'm like, wow. No, there's so much that you said there. That's just so, it's so powerful. We must first accept that there's an issue before we can actually address it. There must be a willingness to have uncomfortable conversations. You started off, explaining that it's not about whether you're a racist. So having the conversation on diversity and inclusion or breaking down systemic racism isn't to vilify a person and wag a finger at you white person, you're a racist, but it's speaking to the system. and acknowledging this wider system that's it's so pervasive, it's in the air. There's no running from it. So it's not about a person, it's about a system.
Yeah, it is. And I tell you this, the question then becomes, you have people say, well, I'm not a racist. That was, our ancestors, our fathers, father, grandfather, all this stuff. The question then becomes, well, your great, 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 great grandfather, the system that they built, one, how you benefited from it today. And two, in order for these systems, and in order for these systems to stay, present, in order for that racism to still be here today, you have to uphold it. So that means you play a part in the system, right? And so to say that you're not a racist is one thing, but to still accept the privileges that system gives you is another thing. Because as long as you still accept the privilege that you get from that system that was built on racism, then you're still a part of the problem at the end of the day. And until you go to that place to where you don't accept those privileges anymore, you start to look and you start to go against, the privileges that you get in those particular situations, until you start to say, hey, no, I'm not going to, reap the benefits from this, then you're still a part of the system that was created, right? And it's something to where, it is the things that have changed, right? Slavery changed, 13th Amendment came, you read 13th Amendment, is outline slavery, digital servitude, unless, criminal, you go to prison, then you kind of go back to the same place. It's building systems to where now, yes, we're gonna enact a law that's going to ultimately free slaves. But then now we're going to disproportionately put African Americans in prison, which we specifically stated is the modern day slavery in the 13th Amendment. And so it's doing things like that, right? We think about, the housing, right? We think about, wealth, right? We think about all these different things, right, that are happening. The systems were put in place, and then those systems continue to be upheld by the people who benefited from those systems. And as long as those people benefited from those systems still, they held strong even until today. And so that's the conversations that we got to have, is that I'm not saying you're racist.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is,
it's not personal.
You benefit from
Systemic.
A system, right? And you uphold it. And as long as you accept the privileges from that system, then that system will continue to live on.
So, so for those corporates that want to improve D&I, you've said we can't just look to treat the symptom. We have to go deeper to the cause.
Yeah.
So what do you think corporates, business owners can do in doing that?
Yeah. I think that it is, I would say this. When you're going in, you're trying to move this forward. You have to connect with people on an individual level to help them really go into self-reflection, to understand, once again, how have I played a part in this system? Until someone accepts their role in the system, you can't solve or eliminate the system that's continuing to thrive, that they're contributing to. That, first of all, and this is the one thing I want to make clear, the word privilege, it's not an attack on the individual, right? That's the first part. The second part is, and this is something that we got to recognize as well, as Black people, we have privilege as well. We have certain privileges too.
Everyone has privilege.
And that's
to varying degrees.
Correct, to varying degrees. And so that is something that I want to make sure that it's not like, okay, we're finna attack a certain group of people, white people. Like, it's not about that. It is ultimately going through and helping understand what are the systems that were built, helping those people understand within your organization how they contribute to those systems, and then what can be done in order to break these systems down within our organization. There's a lot, whether that's pay, the way that we're paid, pay gaps, and that's that piece of it, the way that we're promoted. If that's the rubric by which you select your leaders off of, the question is, one, How did you create that rubric to select your leaders? How did you create the criteria for leadership development within your organization? How do we know who gets the best projects and who don't get the best projects, the most visibility, and who does? These are various different systems that are being created inside of organizations to where you have to go back and re-examine. You have to understand, how do we get to the place that we are today? And then we have to break it down and rebuild it so that we can rebuild it in a way to where this is what we want. This is the path that we want to be on for the future. Some of that is through, education. I'm not a big fan of training. I'm gonna say that. I am a fan. So, and I would say it this way: a lot of training I'm not a fan of. If you do training has to be done in a way to where it is a reoccurring event situation that happens that allows for not only just that one day, that one moment to happen. How are you doing the training? How are you giving supplemental information? How are we following up to make sure that, how are we doing? What are some things we can do better on a very kind of, consistent basis, every month, really checking in, posting, seeing how those things work, providing modules, providing readings, providing other aspects of where they can go and continue to learn about themselves, learn about everything that's going on, having those conversations with different groups inside of their organizations. Because in a lot of cases, right, sometimes we just need to have a conversation. We just need to go talk to people from different backgrounds and different groups. We need to immerse ourselves so that we can learn and not let the media, not let the imagery of what's being put out there dictate the way that we feel, the way we think, the way that we act. And so for organizations, it's a piece of that, right? It's a piece of breaking down those systems by first understanding, how did we get to today? I love the West African term of Sankofa. That is one of my favorite terms, right? Looking back, really to inform moving forward. And so how do we do that as an organization, right? There's also aspects to where organizations need to prioritize culture and culture over individualists, meaning Jim, yes, he's a great salesperson, but Jim is a racist. And everybody in the organization knows that Jim is racist. And I'm not picking on anybody named Jim. I just threw a name out there. so everybody named Jim, I'm not talking about you. This is an example. But we have to understand that, once again, there are a lot of people that we have in our organization that uphold the culture that we don't want. And no matter how successful they are individually, no matter how much value they bring to the business performance-wise, we have to make the decision as an organization. If we want to shift the culture, if we want to transform the culture, we need to ultimately look at the people who make up the culture and figure out who's representing the behaviors and values of the culture that we want and who's not, and then make sure that we get out of those engagements and relationships as fast as possible, right? And it's a burning of the current state is what I would say. And what I mean there is, I'm big on transformation, not change, right? The way that I look at that, I say change is like a tadpole, right? We think about the process of becoming a frog. Tadpoles grow legs, it gets bigger, its tail disappears. Ultimately, you have that frog or that toad, but the toad or frog looks very similar, or it resembles the tadpole that it came from. That's change. When we think about transformation, we think about the caterpillar. You go through that metamorphosis process, cocoon, you come out as a butterfly. But then you look at the butterfly, it resembles nothing of the caterpillar that it started off with. It can't go back. There's no way to actually go back to being a caterpillar. There's no way that you can see that what I was before and what I am today. And so when we think about transforming those systems, we have to look at, how do we make sure that as we move forward in this transformation process, we're preventing the ability for us to revert or go back to where we were before. And that is something that, as organizations, when we think about leadership changes, when we think about, what's the DNA of the organization and how do we continue to move this forward, those are just the deep, deep discussions that we have to have in corporate that's going to allow us to move into a space and move into a place to where we can actually make progress. Because if I run a relay race and, my grandmother ran the first leg of the relay race, my mother ran the second leg, and I run the third. But if my third leg is a repeat of my mother's second leg of the race, we haven't made progress, right? We just continue to run the same leg of that race, right? So, so how do we make progress? How do we hand the baton out so that people can get further? And so hopefully that answers your question, because I'm, I love this space. And so it's just something to where, there's so much progress that can be made. I'm excited about it. It's very emotional to a certain extent, but I know that we can make it, right, if we take the right approach to understand what the problem is and really address it.
I love what you said about the distinction between change and transformation. That's just stuck in my head. And before you go, I want to learn a little bit more about Jump Recruits. Tell us more about your company and what it does.
Yeah.
And how you help
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah. I'll say it this way. And I actually do two things. So, as mentioned a little bit before, we're full service recruitment. That means that one, we have consultants on the team that work with organizations and actually building out strategies and developing those strategies within the organizations. Advisors to TA leaders, advisors to D&I leaders as we look at the recruitment process and how it connects internally. But then we also have a recruitment team that does the recruitment for a lot of organizations to where we're helping you build communities, right? We're big on building communities because if you can build a community of diverse talent to where you can go in and build relationships, not transact with them, help them develop and grow in their process, understand who they are and their needs, and then provide for their needs in that community. You're making it easier for your team to be able to actually go out and recruit and source great talent because they know who you are. They know the value that they bring to your organization, that you bring to them. And we're starting to make that synergy happen before the job offer even goes out. And so helping, make those connections from a community perspective, as well as from a recruiter perspective, going out and actually helping organizations build that pipeline internally. And so, that is kind of the piece around Jump Recruits. We have a lot of tools that help us do that. One being jumprecruits.com, which is actually a talent career advancement platform to where candidates can go connect with employers, apply for jobs, get content development as such. And then also I want to say this is that, I would say when I started Jump, there was always a bigger mission, right? And the way that I looked at Jump ultimately at the end of the day was what's the process of building wealth, right? In our communities. And I always thought about this aspect of wealth. The first step of building wealth is having to have stable income and having income that not only can you pay your bills, but then you also have enough money to where you can invest, to where you can go and put it into other areas, right, to let it grow. And so Jump Recruits was always intended to be the end goal in that process, because I always felt that a lot of companies did mentoring programs. They did, helping individuals make it through the current situation that they were in. But then once they got them through those times, once they get that person to high school and they graduate, it's almost like they kind of let them go to where they didn't help them actually ultimately provide for themselves, provide for their family, give them ways in which they can go in and make an income, which ultimately, if you don't have a strong mind or strong head coming out of a lot of those mentoring programs, you're going to resort back to what right? Whether that's illegal, activity or whatever the case may be. And so the goal was, how do we make sure that if we do anything before, mentoring, all these different things, how do we make sure that we have a place that we can send them, right? We can get them jobs with corporations that can pay them good money to where they can start to build this wealth, invest in homes, buy homes, long-term assets, things of that nature. And so Jump actually sits under a broader company called the Cornerstone Collective Group. And look, I'm huge, right? We talk about the cornerstone, the stone that the builders refuse became the cornerstone. We get all into that. But they're that organization is focused on kind of a couple of the core pillars for how do we advance the Black community? How do we advance the state that we're in? That includes looking at food insecurity, as far as how do we look at the food deserts in which we have in our communities? How do we make sure that we're able to provide healthy options, understanding that we're leaders in diabetes, we're leaders in various different heart conditions, high blood pressure, and a lot of it is because of what we eat. A lot of it is because of ultimately what we're getting, right, from the scraps and things of that nature. And so how do we help lead healthier lives, right, by making food more secure, by giving options to where you don't have to charge 4 or 5 times extra, right, in order to actually get something healthy, right, which is which is crazy, right? In order for me to eat healthy, I got to pay 3 times as much. Or I got to get, processed food, which I'm not going to get into beyond meat. But so, and then the other part in that is education. And so, and this is a part, I'm not an educator. I support all of my educators. I love you. You got patience. They should pay y'all 3 times the amount of money they pay you, or 5 times. Trust me, it's not enough for what you do, right? But how do we, from an early age, help our children grow up to where not only do they have knowledge about what's around them, but they have knowledge of themselves. They have knowledge of where they come from, right? I like to say this, and is that a lot of people say, well, Blacks, you've made a lot of progress. And I think and I look and I listen, you made a lot of progress, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just saying to myself, like, yes, I made a lot of progress if you assume that the beginning of Black people was slavery. And if that's where you start our existence, then you could say we made some type of progress. But if we go back to where were we before slavery? Who were we before slavery? And that's the part to where we're not addressing, right? We don't want to address, right? We don't want to talk about the impact that Africa had on the world. We don't want to understand the roots of who we are as people, right? We have to stop, just as Black people, right? Even for us, the question isn't who are we to white people, or who are we to others? The real question is, who are we to each other? Who are we to ourselves? And that's something that, like, it involves like a deep self-reflection and understanding that I want to make sure that our kids learn that, like, to have that self-love, to know that, 1619 wasn't the beginning of your existence, to know that the kings and queens of your lineage is there, to understand the impact at every point of the earth came from a place in which you originate from, is something to where we're not giving enough to our children, and they're not understanding and actually getting that information as they grow. And so the education piece is about, how do we give that information, drop breadcrumbs to where they can start to dig deeper and know that, when you say Juneteenth and you say, well, this is the ending of slavery in the US, right? We've dropped enough breadcrumbs to where they know that June 19, 1865 was not the ending of slavery, because there were still 225,000 slaves in Delaware and West Virginia at that time, to where they did not get free until December 6th. That's an important fact, because if you dictate my history by, then I don't know the real truths to that. You had 250,000 people still in bondage in a part of the United States. That's stuff that we need to understand, right? That's stuff to where, we need to understand that 1619, to 1619 to 1865, 60 some odd years, right? In slavery bondage. 1865 to 1877, probably the most important point for Blacks in America, which was Reconstruction. We was able to build wealth. We was able to actually go out, own property. We was able to actually go out and start to build for ourselves and our community. 1877 came around. That was the 1877, compromise of 1877, compromise of 1876. Reconstruction ends. Jim Crow comes into play. Racism, restricting people to vote. That goes in for almost 90 something odd years, right? And then you have Civil Rights Act of 1965. You have fair housing. You have affirmative action. Fair housing was 1968, ratified in 1969. Think about it this way. So in 1970, let's just take that as a date. Black children in America born in 1970 was the first children, African Americans, born with all their rights as a citizen in the United States.
Imagine that. So recent in history.
And that is 1970, is not a long time. That's how we gotta look at this, right? And so the way that we've been taught, the information that we've been given, right? Understanding like the impact and like just that knowledge overall is something that I think that from an education perspective, we have to reprogram our children if we want to have, a vibrant, culture and moving forward, right? There's so much that's happening now that's trying to eliminate who we are as individuals and who the impact that we've made on this world, to where we need to let our children know that is greater than what you've been told. And so that's a part of from the Cornerstone Collective Group. And that's like the bigger mission, right? And so how do we move that forward? And how do we make sure that, we're setting up the next generation, right? And I'll leave you with this, is that, I live my life by a leadership legacy statement. And that says that whether I meet you one time or I meet you 10 times, I want to make sure that I'm intentional about how I interact with you. And that means that when I'm, dead and gone, right? I always tell my wife this, is that, look, I'm going to have stadium, but you got to RSVP for my funeral. I'm just going to be honest with you. So it's not going to be enough seats. And so, but everybody, I want everybody to say, at the end of the day, that one, I extended the bridge and I gave all that I had until there was nothing left. And that's every time I have those interactions, I'm focusing on how do I extend the bridge? How do I make sure that person coming behind me, that youth, that individual coming behind me, can walk smoothly past the obstacles and challenges that I had to face and make sure that they continue to move this path forward, right? Whether that's building wealth, whether that's being an impact in the world, whatever that is, right? We just need to make sure that everything that we do and everything that I do extends that bridge, because my children should not go through the same thing that I went through, right? As they move through their lives, right? And so,
incredible.
That's it.
Wow. Wow. How can folks reach you, Cedric?
Yeah, so look, I'm on all social media as Cedric Empowers. At Cedric Empowers. Also, CedricLChambers.com is the website. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, all of that good jazz, right? So connect. Would love to, hear folks' thoughts. I thank you, right, for being a guest on the show here. And so I love the work that you're doing. I saw the episodes, I was binge watching. And so just listening and having those discussions, and these are needed discussions that we have to have, and having more is needed. So I thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Nice. Awesome.